So let's talk about bias. And there are many ways where sampling bias can occur. And I'll give you some examples for it to make more sense to you. So let's go to the next slide. So this is just extra information for you if you choose to read. This is a slide on sampling bias, and they give you many examples of bias that could happen with sampling. I'm just going to go over the first two, just so that you have an idea of how bias can occur when researchers are trying to get people to come and participate in their study. So I'm going to ask you this question over here. Let's say I'm a researcher and I want to measure, or I want to see how many teenagers use illegal drugs. Okay, so I want to see, or I want to measure how many teenagers use illegal drugs. So to do so, I think that the best way for me to find teenagers is to go to all the schools in Ontario, for example. So I go to all the schools in Ontario, and maybe I send out a survey and I ask all the teenagers whether they use illegal drugs or not. And I expect, it's anonymous, so I would hope that the students would respond accurately. Now, is that a good way of measuring teenage use of illegal drugs? And some may say yes, that's the best way to find teenagers. But really, if you really think about it, I'm missing people or students that are being homeschooled. So I didn't get to ask those teenagers. I didn't get to ask those teenagers who have dropped out. Perhaps those that have dropped out are the ones that are using illegal drugs, and I never got to them. So when you just go to a specific area, like a high school, that's not good enough. You need to reach out to the homeschool students. You need to reach out to the dropout students to get a more accurate representation of teenage use of illegal drugs. So that's an example of bias, because here you're not getting an accurate representation of all the teenagers. Another example is self-selection bias. And self-selection bias is when only people that want to participate will come forward and participate. So an example of this is, let's say maybe a few years ago, before marijuana got legalized, a survey was sent out asking what people think about whether marijuana should get legalized. The people that participated in the study were only those that had a strong opinion. So people who felt very strongly about legalizing marijuana, or people who felt very strongly about not legalizing marijuana. Those were the people that came forward and did the study. Everyone else who had, no feedback did not participate in the study. But everyone else who didn't really care about this topic didn't participate in the study. So that's self-selection bias, where only those that feel very strong about the topic of marijuana, of legalizing marijuana, those were the people that participated. And that's not good enough. Really, ideally, in an ideal world, we want everyone to participate. We want everyone's opinion. Even though, we want all the people's opinion, including those that feel strongly and those that, disagree. And we also want the middle ground people too. Okay, so self-selection bias is only when specific people who feel very strong about a topic come forward. So those are examples of bias. And as researchers, we try so hard to avoid bias. We try so hard to get an accurate representation of people, but sometimes it's not so easy. Now, when we're looking at a sample, or when we're looking at people that are willing to participate in the study, the people that we look at, or the sample that we look at, could be heterogeneous. And heterogeneous means that the people we're looking at are very different. There could be some kids, there could be some seniors, there could be some middle-aged people, so we have lots of different people. There could be some females, there could be some males, there could be, if you look at race, there could be African Americans, there could be Asians, there could be Indians, there could be Caucasians. There's so many different people that are in our sample, and that is considered heterogeneous, when you have many different people participating in your study. Sometimes we could have a study of a homogeneous population, where the people we look at are very similar in condition. So maybe all these people over here are all males, or all these people over here are all between the age of 18 to 35. and everyone's very similar, or all these people here are diabetic, and we want to test out a drug for diabetes. So homogeneous people are when everyone is, where the people in the sample are very similar in conditions, characteristics, or attributes. Heterogeneous people are people that are in the study that are very, very different. So when we look at sampling, there are two different types of categories. There's the non-probability sampling, and there is the probability sampling. And we're going to look at the two different types of sampling. Non-probability sampling are types of sampling methods that uses non-random methods, and I'll give you some examples of that later on. Whereas probability sampling, which we'll look at later on, are examples of random sampling. So here we're randomly choosing people. Here we are specifically choosing a group of people to come and participate in our study. Here we're putting all the names in a hat and then choosing those people to come, or the people that are selected to come and participate in our study. So the question I have for you before I end this video is, which type of sampling is better? Is it better to random sample, or is it better to not random sample? Which is more stronger? Which has a less chance of bias? I'll answer that in the next video.